Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Long Distance Worklife, the podcast designed to help you thrive, survive, and generally find your way in the crazy world of remote and hybrid work. I am Wayne Turmel. We are Marissa-less today, but that means that we have a really excellent interview to share with you. And I'm excited to talk to Sara Daw from the CFO Center. And we are going to look at some factors of remote work that maybe we haven't before. And so I'm looking forward to that. Let me introduce Sara Daw, who's joining us from the UK today. Hi, Sara. Who are you and why do we care?
Hi there. Thanks for having me, Wayne. So my name's Sara Daw. I am the group CEO of a business called the CFO Center. And that's a business that provides fractional CFOs to growing entrepreneurial businesses. For those that don't want a full-time version and can't afford a full-time version, but recognize they need the skill set. It's a global business in 17 countries. And I've also written a book about the business model that sits underneath it called Strategy and Leadership as Service, how the access economy meets the C-suite. That's me.
Look at you with the subtitle and everything in there. Nicely done. Sara, I was excited to talk to you for a couple of reasons. First of all, your company is fully remote and has been for a long time. So you've got a lot of experience there. But one of the things, and we'll get there, we'll talk about that for sure. But one of the things that we haven't done on this show very much, and it's not intentional, it just hasn't happened, is we haven't spent a lot of time talking about the C-suite and in particular the CFO. And I know that for a lot of organizations, the pushback on remote work or going hybrid or whatever, a lot of that pushback comes from the, shall we lovingly call them the bean counters, the people in charge of the money. What, from a financial standpoint, what are some of the objections or concerns that get raised when people talk about wanting to do more remote work?
I think that's really interesting because I actually haven't come across that so much around it coming particularly from the CFOs that are measuring the return in terms of the fact that they want people to go in the office and not be hybrid or remote. But I would have thought that obviously it's going to be around productivity. I would have thought from the CFO perspective, they're the people that are going to be measuring output and they're going to be fully on board with all of those concepts and making sure that the business is moving forward. I mean, I've actually found the most pushback that we've come across in terms of not being full-time and present has actually been from the funders. So the backers of businesses, the private equity businesses, they've really wanted someone sat in an office measuring and looking after their financial investment full-time and on-site. So I think that's where we've seen most of the pushback, if any. I think, quite frankly, it all comes down to the relationship. It's all about relationships. And if you can get the relationship right, for me, I think you can prove that it doesn't matter where you're sitting.
One last question on this, because I hear what you're saying and I don't disagree with you, but how much does sunk cost the notion of we've got an office and nobody's in it and that makes leaders crazy?
Yeah.
Play a role.
Absolutely. And actually, we were one of those businesses because we've always been remote. And literally just before COVID, we took on an office space for our central team members so that we could have them in the office. And that was sort of a few weeks before COVID. And then it was empty for ages. So I totally understand that. I mean, if a business has invested in space, then they are going to want to fill it. I think now, post-COVID, many businesses have realized that actually, yes, it's a sunk cost, but it's also not necessarily the cost that they need to bear anymore, at least not to the extent that before COVID. And actually, they can have much smaller space and use the space more wisely for hybrid. Obviously, that means that only happens if the management and the executive are supportive of remote and hybrid working, which some are and some aren't. And we can get onto that in a moment. But I agree. I think we've moved away enough from COVID now that the leases have changed, and we've had a few years where it is possible to be more flexible about what office space we've got.
Yeah, so let's talk about that flexibility. In your mind, we've been talking a lot on the show about how hybrid work isn't just some people are in the office and some people not. I mean, there's more to it than that. In your mind, what is hybrid work at its best?
Yes, I mean, I think it's around flexibility. I mean, the one thing that I hear just time and again from every single set of workers, the knowledge workers I'm talking about, that can work remotely. Every single time that I hear from surveys, from anecdotes, from conversations, it's flexibility people want. So however that shakes down is sort of okay. And I think it's different for different individuals, for different roles, for different parts of the hierarchy. And so the big issue that I see with hybrid is that it's quite a complex problem. It's a wicked problem, yet we're trying to solve it with a very simplistic and blunt instrument by saying it's 2 days in and 3 days out, or vice versa. And it just isn't that simple. And it depends on the person, as I said, the role, etc. And actually, I think a much better way, I mean, I'm much more in favour of letting the workers work it out for themselves. So I'm in the camp of going down the self-managed teams approach to this and saying, okay, we've got to get this output done, not this, let's forget the inputs. Let's get the output done. How are we going to organise ourselves as a team to do that? What are we going to do together? What do we need to be and where do we need to be to do that? Do we need to be online? Do we need to be physically present? And we'll cover for each other when we need to, when people need more flexibility. And I think that the big benefit of that is we're trusting our teams to work it out. They have the best information at their fingertips to be able to do that. And then they move into job crafting, and that gives them real purpose and meaning over their work, and that element of control around it being flexible. And then I think you see engagement go up.
Now, you just used a term which I have not heard before, and I think I know what it means, but, in very small words and slowly. Explain to me job crafting.
Yeah, so this is where individuals can design their jobs or elements of their jobs. So I'm a big fan of setting out the tram lines and the guardrails with your functional leader. So the functional leader setting out the parameters and the direction of travel, but then so essentially the what of the job. But then leaving it up to the individuals to figure out the how and letting them tell the management or their leaders how they're going to do it and what resources and support they need to do it. So they are crafting their job to fit the requirements of the outputs. And it's sort of up to them how they do it, when they do it, where they do it. And there are parameters. Sometimes you have to be together as teams. Sometimes you have to be available on a phone to talk to customers, whatever it might be. But we're very much, then you're giving the agents, you're giving your workers agency, you're giving them control. And those are, in my opinion and from my research, those are the elements of being at work that enable us to get real joy and flow and meaning and purpose, which means we really enjoy our work. And the thing is, you get quite a lot of that from going freelance. And I'm saying we can learn from the freelance world. And there's, I don't see why we can't put some of those parameters into the employed world. We've got an employment contract to support it, but the way we work, we can do it we can do it in this way too. And that's how I've run my teams, even when they've been employed in the business. I've let them get on with it and decide how to get it done in the best way.
Well, let's talk about that, because you have been, with one ill-fated exception, remote since the get-go, since you started your company. And for you as the leader, what has been the biggest challenge? Let's start with the challenges and then we'll get to the fun stuff.
So there are challenges. There's no doubt about it. And I think because we set up as remote, and so we had, in our business, we would have individual C-suite professionals, CFOs, in working. They would go and work fractionally, so part-time. And that would mean they were hybrid for businesses. So they would go 1 day a week, 2 days a month. The internal team that we have to support that, we call that our central team. We never had offices to start with because we saw it as an extra cost and overhead that we just didn't really think we needed. So we were always remote as a team, and we all worked from home from the start. And there are challenges because, and don't forget, we didn't have so much technology back then either.
I remember.
So what we used to do was be very deliberate about what we were going to do and what were the reasons, so why we would need to come together. But we made sure that we did meet physically regularly. And when I say regularly, it might be once a month. And we would get the whole business together twice a year. So in teams locally once a month. And we made sure that we did things during that time that were very much around relationship building. So we didn't do mundane things. We didn't come together and then just do our work together. We absolutely built relationships, and we were very, very focused on that. So we would do fun activities, work activities, and we would design very deliberately our time together because it was so precious. And that meant that when we were apart, we were in our flow doing our work, and we would communicate by, text or email in those days, and phone. Now it's so much easier because we've got all the video conferencing, which we didn't have back then. We used Skype a lot in the early days. That was available. So that was the plan, and it was about making sure that we brought in the elements of psychological ownership into the relationships that we build. So my research shows that, we can feel ownership towards our jobs and towards our organizations that we work with by there being a value exchange. So firstly, it has to work. We need to be able to earn money and have a living, and our business needs to get value out of what we do. So it needs to be a good value exchange. It needs to add to our identity. So we need to feel good about being a member of X organization, and it needs to help build us up in some way in terms of adding to our status. And then we need to have a home, which means we need to be with like-minded people. And if you can build those things into the relationship at work, then you start to get feelings of ownership towards the role and the job, which can make where you're sitting and who you're sitting with less relevant, because you've got those other aspects that sort of a scaffolding to hold you in your role. And there are certain things that you can do to build that ownership.
Wow. And we'll talk about that in a second. You said something, you kind of glossed it over like everybody understands this, and I don't think they do. This notion that if the team is working remotely, there is still if not a need, certainly a desire to physically get together. And that means, you might not have an office, but you're going to have to rent a conference room, or you're going to have to pay for some travel, and you just have to do that.
Yes,
as
and
part
we
of it.
did.
And a lot of organizations think, well, everybody works remote, that annual meeting might be enough. And I think depending on the organization, it might not be.
So I deliberately put two all company conferences into the schedule per year. I didn't think one was enough. And it took a while to catch on, I have to say, because don't forget, we were working, our team were freelancers. So, I couldn't force these people to come. But actually, over time, everyone really started to see the value of it being twice a year. And that was, and some people had to travel further than others for that. But then the monthly get-togethers in the local teams, I think, were hugely important, because you then get some intimacy into the relationships with co-workers and team leaders. And that's part of building this psychological ownership. So, and you need to be able to hang out to do that. And you need to be able to do something. So often it works in an informal setting. So we might get together and, discuss the business during the day or part of the day, but then we do something very much fun and different and social, which is where you can hang out together and allow the relationships to flourish just through more casual conversations. And that's really needed, I think, really needed.
As we reach the end of our time, you mentioned that there were some specific things that you could do. Let's share a couple of those with our folks so they can blatantly feel them.
So a big one is making sure that the parties involved feel that they can have access to each other. So you're accessible, approachable, and available. That's really important in remote circumstances to build this psychological ownership. Because if you feel you can get hold of each other quickly and you're going to be responsive to each other, and it goes both ways. If you want other people to be responsive to you, you need to be responsive to them. That helps build relationships.
Not for nothing, but in order for that to happen, there need to be some discussions and ground rules about when are you available and how do you reach people. And that doesn't happen just out of good intentions. No,
you have to be very good at planning ahead and very good at communicating when you are available and when you aren't available and what are the parameters. So that's a really good point. Another big one is co-creation. So doing things together, even if it's done remotely, but actually, because then we're investing ourselves in activities with others. And so the very nature is you have to communicate with each other to do it. But then there's some investment in what you've created for the organization, which again bonds the individuals to the organization and their co-workers. So that's another big one. And intimacy. So it's about allowing time, whether that's online or offline, but allowing time just to get to know each other and to have those times where you share, deliberately have sessions where you talk about, things that about yourself that you wouldn't normally talk about in a work situation. So allow those informal sessions to happen. And I think that's where coming together physically does really help with those. So those are the sorts of things that help bond individuals to organizations and their co-workers, even if they're not, physically working together in an office all day. And I have to add, by the way, that often, I think this is really important. Often we go into an office, and I'm sure you've heard this before many times, you go into an office and you don't really talk to anyone anyway. You just get on your screen and do your job. I mean, that can happen in office environments. So being very deliberate about the times when you're actually going to build relationships, be with others, I think you can do that even if you're remote.
Sara, thank you so much. So much good stuff in this conversation. Folks, if you want to learn more about Sara, we will have all kinds of links and information and the CFO Center and her book, Strategy and Leadership as a Service, on our homepage. Sara, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
And folks, if you are interested visit longdistanceleader.com, like and subscribe to the show. You know how podcasts work. It's embarrassing to have to keep begging, but we appreciate your support. If you are interested in our new book, The Long Distance Leader, Revised Rules for Remarkable Remote and Hybrid Leadership, now in its second edition after 6 years and 7 languages, stop by longdistanceworklife.com/LDL or kevineikenberry.com/LDL and learn more. If you have comments, suggestions, guest ideas, vicious personal attacks, stop by. You can connect with Marissa or myself on LinkedIn. Long Distance Work Life has a page on LinkedIn, or you can just email us at the email addresses listed. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that this podcast gives you some ideas, some spark, gets you thinking in new ways about the way that we work today. We will be back next week with a Marissa episode. And that's it. I'm Wayne Turmel. Don't let the weasels get you down.